Hey, how's it going, guys? It is day 31, October 26th. Time for some read aloud. Here we go. Sounded kind of cool. I like it. I might have to work on that song this weekend. Okay, where were we? "Where's old Galleon the butler?" said one. "I haven't seen him at the tables tonight. He ought to be here now to show us what is to be done." Remember, they're talking about how they're realizing that the barrels are gone and stuff. "I shall be angry if the old slow coach is late," said another. "I have no wish to waste time down here while the song is up." "Oh, no, wait, this is when they're getting ready to put the barrels in." All right. "Ha ha," came a cry. "Here's the old villain with his head on a jug. He's been having a little feast all to himself and his friend the captain." "Shake him, wake him," shouted the others impatiently. Galleon, who was not at all pleased to be shaken or wakened, and still less at being laughed at. Where was I? Hold on a second, guys. Hey, Penny, you need to go over there. So you're bumping the camera. Apologize. Come over here. Come over here. Say, sorry, I bumped the camera. Say it. Get out of here. Okay, hold on. Let me make sure it's still centered. Okay. "Small wonder," said they, "with the explanation stands close at hand in a jug. Give us a taste of your sleepy drop before we fall to. No need to wake the turnkey yonder. He has had his share by the looks of it." Then they drank once round and became mightily merry all of a sudden. But they did not quite lose their wits. "Save us, Galleon," cried some. "You began your feasting early and muddled your wits. You have stacked some full casks here instead of empty ones. If there is anything in weight?" "Get on with the work," growled the butler. "There is nothing in the feeling of the weight in an idle tosspot's arms. These are the ones to go, and no others." "Do as I say." "Very well, very well," they answered, rolling the barrels to the opening. "On your head be it if the king's full butter tubs and his best wine are pushed into the river for the lakemen to feast on for nothing. Roll, 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 rolling down the hole. Heave, ho, splash, pump, down they go, down they bump." So they sang, as first one barrel and then another rumbled to the dark opening and was pushed over into the cold water some feet below. Some were barrels really empty, some were tubs neatly packed with a dwarf each, but down they all went, one after another, with many a clash and a bump, thudding on top of one below, smacking into the water, jostling against the walls of the tunnel, knocking into one another and bobbing away down the current. It was just at this moment that Bilbo suddenly discovered the weak point in his plan. Most likely you saw it some time ago and have been laughing at him, but I don't suppose you would have done half as well yourself in his place. Of course, he was not in a barrel himself, nor was there anyone to pack him in. Even if there had been a chance, it looked as if he would certainly lose his friends this time. Nearly all of them had already disappeared through the dark trapdoor and get utterly left behind and have to stay lurking as a permanent burglar in the elf caves forever. For even if he could have escaped through the upper gates at once, he had precious small chance of ever finding the dwarves again. He did not know the way by land to the place where the barrels were collected. He wondered what on earth would happen to them without him, for he had not had time to tell the dwarves all that he had learned or what he meant to do once they were out of the wood. While all these thoughts were passing through his mind, the elves, being very merry, began to sing a song up round the river door. Some had already gone to haul on the ropes which pulled the portcullis at the water gate, so as to let out the barrels as soon as they were all afloat below. Down the swift dark stream you go, back to the lands you once did know. Leave the halls and caverns deep, leave the northern mountains steep, where the forest wide and dim, stoop and shadow gray and grim. Float beyond the world of trees, out into the whispering breeze, past the rushes, past the reeds, past the marshes, waving weeds, through the mist that riseth white, up from mere and pool at night. Follow, follow, stars that leap up the heavens cold and steep. Turn when dawn comes over land, over rapid, over sand. South away and south away, seek the sunlight in the day. Back to pasture, back to mead, where the kine and oxen feed. Back to gardens on the hills, where the berry swells and fills. Under sun like under day, south away. Down the swift dark stream you go, back to the lands you once did know. Now the very last barrel was being rolled to the doors. In despair and not knowing what else to do, poor Bilbo caught a hold of it and was pushed over the edge with it. Down into the water he fell, splash, into the cold water with the barrel on top of him. He came up again, spluttering and clinging to the wood like a rat, but for all his efforts he could not scramble on top. Every time he tried, the barrel rolled around and round and ducked him under again. It was really empty and floated light as a cork. Though his ears were full of water, he could hear the elves singing in the cellar above, and then suddenly the trapdoors fell to with a boom and their voices faded away. He was in the dark tunnel, floating in icy water, all alone. For you cannot count friends that are packed up in barrels. Very soon a gray patch came into the darkness ahead. He heard the creak of the water gate being hauled up, and he found that he was in the midst of a bobbing and bumping mass of casks and tubs, all pressing together to pass under the arch and get out into the open stream. He had had as much as he could do to prevent himself from being hustled and battered to bits, but at last the jostling crowd began to break up and swing off, one by one, under the stony arch and away. And then he saw that it would have been no good even if he'd managed to get astride his barrel, for there was no room to spare, not even for a hobbit, between its top and the suddenly stooping roof where the gate was. Out they went under the overhanging branches of trees on either bank. Bilbo wondered what the dwarves were feeling and whether a lot of water was getting into their tubs. Some of those that bobbed along by him on the gloom seemed pretty low in the water, and he guessed that these had dwarves inside. I do hope I put the lids on tight enough, he thought, but before long he was worrying too much about himself to remember the dwarves. He managed to keep his head above the water, but he was shivering with cold, and he wondered if he would die of it before the luck turned, and how much longer he would be able to hang on, and whether he should risk the chance of letting go and trying to swim to the bank. The luck turned all right before long. The eddying current carried several barrels close ashore at one point, and there for a while they stuck against some hidden root. Then Bilbo took the opportunity of scrambling up the side of his barrel while it was held steady against another. Up he crawled like a drowned rat and lay on the top, spread out to keep balanced as best he could. The breeze was cold but better than the water, and he hoped he would not suddenly roll off again when they started once more. Before long, the barrels broke free again and turned and twisted off down the stream and out into the main current, and then he found it quite as difficult to stick on as he had feared, but he managed it somehow, though it was miserably uncomfortable. Luckily, he was very light, and the barrel was a good big one, and being rather leaky, had now shipped a small amount of water. At the same, it was like trying to ride, without bridles or stirrups, a round-bellied pony that was always thinking of rolling on the grass. In this way, at last, Mr. Baggins came to a place where the trees on either hand grew thinner. He could see the paler sky between them. The dark river opened suddenly wide, and there it was joined to the main water on the forest river, flowing down in haste from the king's great doors. There was a dim sheet of water no longer overshadowed, and its sliding surface there were dancing and broken reflections of clouds and stars. Then the hurrying water of the forest river swept all the company of casks and tubs away to the north bank, in which it had eaten out a wide bay. This had a shingly shore under hanging banks and was walled at the eastern end by a jutting cape of hard rock. On the shallow shore, most of the barrels ran aground, though a few went on to bump against the stony pier. There were people on the lookout on the banks. They quickly poled and pushed all the barrels together into the shallows, and when they had counted them, they roped them together and left them till the morning. Poor dwarves. Bilbo was not badly off now. He slipped from his barrel and waded ashore, and then sneaked along to some huts that he could see near the water's edge. He no longer thought twice about picking up a supper uninvited if he got the chance. He had been obliged to do it for so long, and he knew now only too well what it was to be really hungry. Not merely politely interested in the dainties of a well-filled larder. Also, he had caught a glimpse of a fire through the trees, and that appealed to him with his dripping and ragged clothes clinging to him cold and clammy. There was no need to tell you much of his adventures that night, for now we are drawing near the end of the eastward journey and coming to the last and greatest adventure, so we must hurry on. Of course, helped by his magic ring, he got on very well at first, but he was given away in the end by his wet footsteps and the trail of drippings that he had left wherever he went or sat. And also he began to snivel, and whenever he tried to hide, he was found out by terrific explosions of suppressed sneezes. Very soon there was a fine commotion in the village by the riverside, but Bilbo escaped into the woods carrying a loaf and a leather bottle of wine and a pie that did not belong to him. The rest of the night he had to pass wet as he was and far from a fire, but the bottle helped him to do that, and he actually dozed a little on some dry leaves, even though the year was getting late and the air was chilly. He woke again with an especially loud sneeze. It was already gray morning, and there was a merry racket down by the river. They were making a raft of barrels, and the raft elves would soon be steering it off down the stream to the lake town. Bilbo sneezed again. He was no longer dripping, but he felt cold all over. He scrambled down as fast as his stiff legs would take him, and managed just in time to get on the massive casks without being noticed in the general bustle. Luckily, there was no sun at the time to cast an awkward shadow, and for a mercy he did not sneeze again for a good while. There was a mighty pushing of poles. The elves that were standing in the shallow water heaved and shoved. The barrels, now all lashed together, creaked and fretted. "This is a heavy load," some grumbled. "They float too deep. Some of these are never empty." "If they had come ashore in the daylight, we might have had a look inside," they said. "No time now," cried the raftmen. "Shove off." And off they went at last, slowly at first, until they had passed the point of rock where the other elves stood to fend off with poles, and then quicker and quicker as they caught the main stream and went sailing away down towards the lake. They had escaped the dungeons of the king and were through the wood, but whether alive or dead still remains to be seen. And that is the end of chapter 9. The next chapter is called A Warm Welcome.